From Sydney Curry returning 2022 basketball recruiting, and finally the women's basketball preview for the Final Four. There's a lot of stuff to talk about on this episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. Today's episode is brought to you by BetOnline. BetOnline has you covered this season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before. BetOnline is where the game starts. Also want to take this time, as always, to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services 5 days a week, your team every day. Busy show for this Thursday edition of the Locked On Louisville podcast. We'll begin talking about Sydney Curry announcing that he is returning next season for the Cardinals. We'll also dive into some 2022 basketball recruiting, talking about Skyy Clark and Devin Ree in particular. And then finally, we will preview the upcoming women's basketball Final Four matchup between the overall number 1 seed South Carolina Gamecocks and the number 1 seed in the Wichita region, the Louisville Cardinals. But we'll start out talking about Sydney Curry announcing his return for the men's basketball team next season. Huge news for the Louisville Cardinals on a couple different fronts. Number one, and I'll go ahead and address this. If you look at Sydney Curry's overall season statistics, you'll say, Dalton, well, a guy who averaged 7 points per game, under 4.5 rebounds, even though he shot 67% from the field, is it really that big of a returning announcement? And the answer is, if you watch the Louisville Cardinals for the past for the last month and a half to 2 months of the season, really in ACC play in general, yes, it is 1,000% a huge announcement. And this was one that probably wasn't necessarily surprising. When most people talked about who was going to be on the team next year that was on the team this year, a handful of players were mentioned. It seemed like Sydney Curry was always mentioned in the mix. He's doing the NIL camp with James Boo Brewer and JJ Traynor in May. So it seemed like the writing was on the wall, but you never know with the one-time transfer rule and stuff like that. Players are entering the portal at an unprecedented rate over the past couple seasons. So, nothing is ever truly set in stone, but the Cardinals get Sydney Curry back in the last month and a half to 2 months of the season. He was arguably Louisville's best player. Going through his game log, had 20 points, 24 points against Virginia, 28 points against Wake Forest, 22 points against NC State. Moving on down the line, had multiple games scoring over double figures and also recording over 10 rebounds. And like I mentioned, shooting the ball 67.2% from the field. So the 6'8" Fort Wayne, Indiana native returns to a Louisville team that is still trying to figure out what next year's roster is going to look like. Jeremy Wallman was on the show yesterday talking about he believes that 5 players ultimately will be, on the team next year that was on the team this past year. Obviously, we don't know those names yet, but, Sam Williamson hitting the transfer portal. I said hittering. That's a weird fusion, but entering the transfer portal. Gabe Wisnitzer also, he was the first one to enter the transfer portal. You also have, Frederick King, Deontay Davis, who were let out of their national letters of intent. And you would assume that with the Deontay likely leaving, that means Dre Davis. It's only a matter of time before he hits the transfer portal. But ultimately, a great building block to start, what is next year's roster. You have, one of your starting big men. Regardless, it's going to be a player is going to, be a huge part of the offense next season. And not to mention getting a full offseason and a season to work with Kenny Payne, who has, long been revered as a very, very good developer of big men like, Willie Cauley-Stein, Julius Randle, etc. A lot of these guys that played for Kentucky, big men wise, gave a lot of credit to Kenny Payne in terms of their respective development. The list goes on, and I think that big men developed very, very good while he or developed very well. Sorry, it's the communications major in me getting a little agitated with my word choice. I apologize. I sound like a complete nerd. But ultimately, I really love the fact that he's back. I think next season he could be flirting with an all ACC mentioned team, all ACC caliber player. You're talking about maybe not necessarily first team, really just kind of depending on what the roster looks like. But I think that when you add, when you improve the guard play for next season, and there's a couple guys, we'll talk about one of them that could possibly join the team in the next segment. When you improve the guard play, and Sydney Curry goes from being kind of a makeshift number one scorer. And I'm not saying he can't, fill that void, but when you add players who take away some of that scoring responsibility and kind of allow him to thrive, because what was happening late in the season for Louisville was the fact that teams were, kind of over game planning for Sydney Curry. They realized that the Cardinals were trying to get the ball down low and let, Sydney Curry eat down low, so to speak. And they were double teaming him. They were, forcing him to catch the ball outside of the paint and really take it to the rim. And I think that he did a very good job of, getting the ball on the baseline and doing a spin move, or even, a drop step down to the paint, or even just using his strength to muscle his way around the basket. I thought that Sydney Curry showed a lot of patience when he got double teamed a lot in ACC play. So I think that ultimately, for the team next season, you can't really get much better news from this current team than having arguably your best player returning. When it comes to what his role could look like next season, what does his production look like? I really just think it kind of depends on who else Kenny Payne brings in. Kenny has been revered as a very, very phenomenal recruiter. I'm not arguing that at any stretch of the imagination. I'm just saying, with his reputation as a recruiter, it would lead one to believe that he's going to make some major upgrades to this roster for next season. And, maybe he's not a guy that takes 15 shots a game, or, maybe it's kind of based upon matchups and stuff like that. What I do think is we're going to see Sydney Curry expand his range offensively. I think that his post offense is going to be a little bit more refined. We're going to see some better footwork. I could definitely see him adding the mid-range jumper to his game. I also think that we're going to see him become more of a defensive stronghold for the Louisville defense next season as well, using his frame to really protect the paint. Not necessarily the tallest guy at 6'8", but very athletic, and reads opposing offenses really well. So at the end of the day, I'm very excited to see what Kenny Payne and whoever's on the coaching staff really get to work with him over the offseason, develop his footwork and kind of refine that, and fine tune some things around the basket. But he's very efficient. Takes good shots. His shot selection really never seems forced. You can see that by him nearly shooting 70% from the field. Despite being a big man, that's still a very impressive statistic. So overall, I love the fact that he's back. I think that the sky is the limit for what Sydney Curry can do next season with a year, or an offseason, I should say, of instruction from Kenny Payne and company. But ultimately, very, very good news for Louisville. But as I mentioned, it really just kind of depends. His production will depend on what the roster ends up looking like next year. There's no doubt that, Kenny Payne's going to use the transfer portal. He might look to some 2023 guys to reclassify, but he's also in the running for some 2022 recruits. We'll talk about two of those guys in specific when we talk about Skyy Clark and Devin Ree here in the next segment. We will do that here in just a second after we talk about our friends over at Athletic Greens. Our next partner has a product that I literally use every day. I started taking Athletic Greens because, I kind of don't have a lot of time to. I do have time, but I'm a procrastinator. I forget a lot. My mind's racing in the morning. But this has really been kind of inserted into my daily routine. It gives me more energy. It helps my immune system with all of these spring allergies and stuff like that. I'm not a huge pill taker. I'm not a huge vitamin taker. I wanted a supplement that actually tastes great and wanted to see what the hype about. And, Athletic Greens has really, really helped me out a ton. So, really, it's one of those things to where you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins with one delicious scoop of Athletic Greens. It has minerals, whole food sourced superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens. I always say that wrong, but it helps start the day right. I absolutely love it. To make it easy, Athletic Greens is going to give you a free 1 year supply of immune supporting vitamin D and 5 free travel packs with your first purchase. All you have to do is visit athleticgreens.com/college. Once again, that is athleticgreens.com/college to take ownership over your health and pick up the ultimate daily nutritional insurance. Also want to take this time before we get into the second segment to talk about our friends over at Stat Hero. March Madness is coming to a close. The best time of the year comes very quickly and goes very quickly. But that doesn't take away my love for this time of the year. I do, however, feel like I've kind of shied away from doing more brackets this season. And that's really kind of in part because of Stat Hero. The NCAA single game pick'ems pits the star players against each other in an amazing hybrid between fantasy and sports gambling. It allows you to take control back from those handicappers that always seem to have the advantage. And it gives you the advantage, resulting in their gamers winning 4 times more often. Why? Because Stat Hero eliminates the mystery about who or what you're going up against. They simply post sets of players for you to take on with a set of players you choose. It's basically what daily fantasy was meant to be, so do yourself a favor. Right now, you can sign up for free at stathero.com/lockedon while using the promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% deposit match. Once again, that's stathero.com/lockedon while using the promo code LOCKEDON for a 100% deposit match. Also want to take this time, as always, to personally thank you for making us your first listen of the day. And just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast is free on all streaming services, 5 days a week, your team, every day. Second segment of the show, I wanted to transition a little bit, continually talking about the roster for next season. It's a work in progress. As everyone knows, the transfer portal is absolutely going berserk at this current time. But there's still some notable 2022 recruiting class names that haven't signed somewhere and are still on the market for some teams that are looking for some late additions, the Louisville Cardinals being one of the prime examples. There's 2 players in particular from the 2022 cycle, 5-star point guard Skyy Clark and 4-star small forward Devin Ree. We will talk about the former first. Ever since Kenny Payne got the job, it seems like Louisville got in the mix for Skyy Clark very, very quickly. The 5-star former University of Kentucky signee was recruited by Kenny Payne while he was at Kentucky before he took the job up with the New York Knicks. He just released his top 6 per Joe Tipton of On3 Recruit, or I think it's on3.com. I think his top 6 includes Tennessee, Washington, Illinois, Louisville, Maryland, and USC. Presumably, some people are saying, Illinois is the number 1, is in the driver's seat at the moment with Louisville right behind. I know he's got some visits planned for the month ahead, and according to Tipton, in a later tweet, he says that Skyy Clark is looking to make a decision some point in April. So you have to feel good if you're the Louisville Cardinals being squarely in the mix. Anything can happen on a college visit. So we will see if Kenny Payne can seal the deal. This is going to be one of his first opportunities to show how elite of a recruiter he is. Skyy Clark's game is one of those to where there's people that out there right now that are a little hesitant about Clark's game because he is coming off of an ACL tear. And, one person told me, hey, when I watch his highlights, it looks like he doesn't necessarily have the explosiveness that he had pre-ACL tear. And I'll say this, and I'm not saying that this is the case for him, but oftentimes with ACL tears, and I get it, surgery and recovery time has never been healing, and, guys have never healed quicker than they are now, but there's still a big mental aspect with ACL tears. There's a mental hurdle that you have to get over. And like I said, I'm not saying that Skyy is struggling mentally, with the ACL tear or the rehab and stuff like that. But I am saying it's a lot easier said than done. Those that have torn their ACL know what I'm talking about, is the fact that, at times you have to give players time to get that explosiveness back. They don't it doesn't automatically come back once you get cleared to play. Once you get some more minutes logged under your belt, once you get some more game reps, full speed game opportunities and stuff like that. I think that that's when you can start to see them start to build that endurance, the stamina back up. Eric Bossy from 24/7 Sports. This is the scouting report he had for Skyy Clark. Any updated scouting report of Clark has to start off by mentioning that he's still in the process of getting to 100%. He tore his ACL last spring and managed to return to the floor by January. The speed with which he was able to recover and get himself back into playing shape is notable in that nobody is capable of doing that without an impressive work ethic and commitment to hard work. While Clark was able to make a quick return to the floor, he was understandably rusty. During his return, he lacked some of the explosion at the rim and ability to shake defenders off the bounce that he had prior to getting hurt. Hopefully that comes back with time. Clark has always had good strength, and he came back from injury stronger than ever, and that strength allows him to play through and off of contact and should serve him well when he makes the transition to college. The last paragraph from Bossy is, at this point, his development, it is probably fair to classify Clark as more of a scoring point guard than traditional playmaker. When he's at his best, he is attacking downhill, making use of his dangerous jump shot and deep range, and playing in an aggressive manner on the offensive end. He is certainly a capable playmaker for others, but when that becomes the sole focus of his game, he can be a bit too passive in looking for his own offense. The rocks of his game are his tight ball handling and creativity offensively. Kind of a little bit of a tweener in terms of a position, a scoring point guard at 6'3", a little bit undersized for an NBA, lead guard. But ultimately, the college level, it's a little different. When I watch Skyy Clark's highlights and game tape, you get that vibe that he is one of the better scorers in the class. Three-level scorer that can create his own shot, doesn't need a lot of room to get off his own shot. Very strong, utilizes that when he gets to the basket, and is very solid in finishing around the rim. Time will tell, assuming he gets that explosiveness back in his first step and stuff like that. But like Bossy said, the work ethic to get back that quickly after an ACL tear is remarkable. So that bodes well for his work ethic in college and stuff like that. Overall, it really will kind of depend on if Louisville can seal the deal on the visit. We will see the official. I don't think I've seen an official date yet, but I'm sure it's probably out there at some point. So obviously Skyy Clark would be an incredible addition to the Louisville backcourt. The second member of the 2022 class that has been talked about a lot recently, Travis Graff. I don't have access to the boards, but I know people who do, and I don't really go seeking information from it, but they'll come to me and say, "Hey, are you hearing this?" or so on and so forth. Travis Graff, shout out to him. I think he had the scoop first from Louisville Rivals. Basically said, Louisville is turning up the heat on Devin Ree. They've offered him, and there's a good chance, that Louisville is going to get right into the mix, and there's a solid chance that they, can, get him to sign into the class. 6'8" small forward from, Virginia, plays for Oak Hill Academy, former LSU signee that decided to look elsewhere when Will Wade got fired. Ranked as the 82nd best player in the class, according to 24/7 Sports Composite, has offers from a lot of big schools. When I watch his game, maybe not necessarily the most athletic player, doesn't, play with a ton of, downhill speed, but very, very efficient as a true shooter. I think he shot over 45% on high volume from three, which is incredible. But a long 6'8", capable defender, kind of a 3-and-D hybrid that, basketball is starting to value more and more, with the introduction of, raining threes all over the court, thanks to Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors back in the mid-2010s. But ultimately, I think that, Devin Ree's game is very, reminiscent of Kamari Lands. I think Kamari Lands does a little bit more in terms of creating his own shots in the mid-range and getting to the basket. I think he has a little bit better vision as well. But ultimately, I think that they're similar in terms of the fact that they can create their own shot from behind the arc. Ree is notably exceptional in catch and shoot situations. And some people are like, well, I was told Kenny Payne was going to get a lot of 5 stars, and he's ranked 80th. Is he really going to be the first recruit? And my response to that is, hey, look. At the end of the day, not all 13 players on scholarship are going to get rotational minutes. I don't think Devin Ree is going to be a guy that comes in and starts right away or plays a huge significant role. I think he's a player that sees more of a substantial role in year 2 after a year in the program and kind of learning. Possible. I saw somewhere where someone called him a 2-and-done prospect. So we will definitely see, but Devin Ree brings a lot to the table, and according to what people are saying, you have to feel good about the Cardinals' chances. So, but we'll kind of put the men's basketball realm to the side for the moment, because women's basketball is on the big stage in Minnesota. Women's Final Four against the South Carolina Gamecocks. I think it's 7 o'clock Eastern tip-off on Friday. We'll talk about everything you need to know about that matchup here in just a second after we talk about our friends at Built Bar. I keep saying it, this time of the year, I pretty much given up on my resolutions. This year, it's a little bit of a different story, though. I've stuck to my resolution to eat right thanks to Built Bar, because it feels like it's really not even a resolution because I actually enjoy eating them. They are the protein bar that tastes like a candy bar covered in 100% real chocolate with so many different flavors to choose from. Literally, Built Bar makes it taste first good and then figures out how to make it healthy afterward. They have low carbs, high in protein. You can go to built.com and scroll down to the macros chart. Better yet, go to built.com right now and use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off of your order placed. Once again, that's use the promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. For the final segment of the show, we will dedicate this portion to the women's basketball team. I know that I said that I'd like to have Cardinal Sports Zone women's basketball beat writer Sam Baisden on, or stateoflouisville.com and host of Off the Walls podcast, Brian Trent, on. Unfortunately, a scheduling conflict on my end had to prevent that, so I doubt there's going to be a Friday episode, just an FYI. But ultimately, I definitely wanted to give this matchup, it's fair talking points and it's fair coverage, because it is definitely going to be a dynamic one, so to speak. And I just exited out of my my overall window that I had up. Here we go. South Carolina opens up right now. They are in an 8.5-point favorite, which is, that's substantial when you look at the Final Four. And look, I remember saying this early on in the week. I don't think that this South Carolina team, despite the fact that they're right now 33-2, I don't think they're like early 2010s UConn good with Breanna Stewart, where they would have multiple undefeated seasons. I don't necessarily think that they are as good as the Baylor teams that won the national title with Brittany Griner, Odyssey Sims and company. So, but that's no disrespect to them. Those are some all-time teams. I think that South Carolina is more beatable than those teams. But at the end of the day, make no mistake about it, these Gamecocks are very, very tough. They play a balanced rotation that goes deep into the bench. They have a ton of size, led by All-American, one of, if not the best player in college basketball, Aliyah Boston, averaging 16.8 points, 12.2 rebounds, and 2.5 blocks per game, respectively. She's shooting the ball 54% from the field, 77.4% from the free throw line. Louisville's game plan, I don't think it's naive enough to understand or even, come to the realization that their game plan likely revolves around limiting what she is able to do on the offensive end. In a perfect world, Jeff Walls' team would love to get her in foul trouble. But that's the thing about it. Even when Boston is not in the game, you have some other players that you can go to that have a ton of size. I always mess this name up. I think it's Leticia Amahir. I apologize if I'm saying that wrong. 6'4" junior from Alabama. Um, 6 points per game, 4 rebounds. Obviously, the stats don't necessarily jump off the page, but they do have size that when Aliyah Boston goes out of the game that they can kind of plug in. Victoria Saxton, 6'2" senior, averaging 6 and 6. And then you have Camila Cardozo, the former Syracuse post player that the Cardinals are familiar with, 6'7" from Brazil, averaging 5 and 5 on over 50% from the field. So kind of an Oregon vibe. They have multiple post players that can really make things challenging. So look for Louisville to try to utilize transition offense by incorporating good defense. But at the end of the day, this is going to be an uphill battle. Let's call a spade here. South Carolina, by the defensive metrics, is a better defensive team than the Louisville Cardinals. They are giving up less points per game. They are rebounding better. They average just under 48 rebounds per game. So limiting offensive rebounds, utilizing transition offense. And this, it's going to be a matchup to where you're going to have to get your best on both the offensive and defensive ends of the floor. Offensively, you're not really going to be able to afford to have a big-time scoring drought, let alone multiple of them like we saw in the game against Michigan. You're going to have to have Haley Van Lith and Kiana Smith hitting their shots. Emily Ingsler's going to have to give you more on the offensive end. And you're going to have players like Olivia Cochran and Liz Dixon step up. And that really translates over to the defensive end as well, guarding their post players. Olivia Cochran, she's been playing very well. Liz Dixon is going to be relied upon heavy here because of the size that South Carolina has. But overall, then you have to get some good minutes from Chelsea Hall, Kiana Smith, Haley Van Lith, and Emily Ingsler out on the perimeter because they do have Destiny Henderson, Zaya Cook. Moving on down the line, you have Bria Beal, Lily Grissett. There's Destiny Littleton. Like I said, there's a good amount of players that have appeared in over 30 games for South Carolina. So this is a very, very deep bench that Dawn Staley has at her usage. Let's see, there's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. I don't even know how this is possible. 12 players that average at least 8 minutes per game. So, they utilize a deep bench. For the Cardinals, like I said, the keys to the game, you hope that this turns into a defensive battle because South Carolina has showed at times that, yes, they are very, very deep. They have a ton of, talent overall. But at the same time, if it gets into a low-scoring affair, well, things can get a little interesting. When you look at what South Carolina's done this season, they've beaten NC State, they've defeated Oregon, they've defeated UConn, they've taken down Maryland, they beat them by 7, beat Duke by 9, Stanford by 4, LSU by 6, Arkansas by 9, so on and so forth. So there are 2 losses on the season. At Missouri, that was an overtime loss back on December 30th. And obviously the SEC championship game against Kentucky, 64-62 back on March 6th. Those are the only 2 losses for the South Carolina Gamecocks. So at the end of the day, as we mentioned all week, it's about limiting offensive rebounds. It's about transition offense, hitting your shots, not going into some scoring droughts or anything like that. It's going to take a very, very big effort here from the Louisville Cardinals. I trust Jeff Walls and company and that coaching staff to devise a great game plan that will put the Cardinals in the best situation possible to succeed and to be able to pull off the upset. And make no mistake about it, it is not an impossible feat to take down South Carolina, but we've got to be honest, it's going to be very, very, very tough. So go Cards, though. But before we get out of here, a couple quick shout-outs. First, the Cardinal Sports Zone podcast. The most recent episode dropped yesterday, so you can check that out at cardinalsportszone.com. Thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen every day. If the Cardinals win tomorrow, there will be an episode on Saturday. If not, we'll be back on Monday to talk about the season as a whole, that game in particular, and any other news. Do yourself a favor. Now make your second listen Locked On NFL Draft. Ryan Tracy and former NFL cornerback Eric Crocker bring the NFL Draft to life every day with inside analysis on college football prospects and NFL front offices. It's free and available wherever you get your podcasts. But that's going to wrap up this Thursday edition of the show. Everyone have a great day, and we will see you right back here either Saturday or Monday. Go Cards.